Hello, my love, and welcome to the Conscious Approach to Stress and Anxiety podcast with me, your host, Becky Evans, founder of Emotional Health School. And for those of you who don't know me, well, today that's all about to change. Throughout this series, I will be revealing tips and tricks that you can use to change your own life. But in today's episode, I will be sharing my story of how I went from a career-driven woman who suffered inside with chronic stress and anxiety and a myriad of physical issues to today, someone who teaches others how to navigate their emotions from a place of balance and from a place of inner peace. And this story starts all the way back to when I was 9 years old. This episode is really for anyone who feels overwhelmed by emotional highs and lows, or who struggles with feeling disconnected from themselves and their loved ones. You might be feeling frustrated, like you're stuck in a cycle of stress and anxiety, and your life looks successful on the outside, so you just don't know why this loop keeps occurring. And you're probably super aware of your feelings, but you're suppressing them because your brain is telling you that they're not valid. And what you're really looking for is inner peace and happiness without needing to make drastic changes on the outside or force yourself into meditation and wellness routines that just don't seem to last. If I described you there, then this story is for you. So whether you're battling with burnout or dealing with unresolved trauma or trying to manage anxiety in a toxic environment, I hope that my journey today can really offer you some insight and some encouragement, because together we will be exploring how a sense of calm really starts from within without needing to change things on the outside. Also, a quick side note, you can find me on Instagram at Emotional Health School, and I would love it if at any point during this story something resonates with you. If it does, please send me a message with the keyword podcast story at Emotional Health School on Instagram so I know what episode you have listened to. So that's podcast story. And if you DM me that on Instagram at Emotional Health School, we can get better acquainted, because, I love listening to your stories and I just love connecting with everybody on the internet. So my door is open. Anyway, that's it from me today. Thank you for listening, and make sure you like and rate it or leave a comment, whatever you do on this platform. I'm not entirely sure, but I know that any engagement is going to help this podcast to grow. So let's get into it. So why share our stories? Sharing your story is super vulnerable. And when you're asked, what is your story? It might not be something that you've reflected on, but I really wanted to share that there is so much empowerment in vulnerability, so much strength in storytelling. There is so much empowerment in knowing that you are not the only one that feels this way, and helping people by showing them that they are not alone. And when we can push past that little bit of discomfort, that little bit of fear, and step into our courage to talk, even if that just helps one person, even if that one person is you, then it's totally worth it, right? So before we begin, a little bit of a trigger warning. We want to let you know that today's episode will include discussions on death and mental health. And if you are sensitive to these topics or feel like this content may be triggering, please feel free to skip this episode. I always say that for me, safety is a huge value of mine. So it felt really important to call that out. Okay, let's get into it. So my story really starts where most people's stories start, way back to little Becky. So I had a very beautiful childhood. It wasn't a perfect nuclear family. My mum and dad weren't together. I have 3 older siblings who I adore. And I have videos of us all playing in the pool together on holiday, and they were throwing me around like this little ball. So, I remember that there was a lot of love, a lot of support, and I was very lucky in a lot of ways. But I remember being at my dad's house one New Year's Eve when I was 9 years old, and he got a phone call which said that my brother had been in a car accident. And kids know. Kids are so much more connected to truth than adults. And side note, I've got two stepchildren, and I know that we cannot protect them by hiding things from them because they are way more aware than adults and they can feel our energy. So for me in that moment, even though the words hadn't been said, I knew for 24 hours that he had passed on to his next life at age 19, but couldn't talk about it. And when this was said to me by my dad, I knew in that moment that, well, I didn't know in that moment, but looking back, I know in that moment that my entire body seized up and I instantly went into a state which we call freeze. And I can really pinpoint that exact moment on top of the stairs where a survival mechanism to cope with that level of trauma, to cope with that much of a shock to my system, my emotional processing just completely shut down. So I always say, this level of grief were very adult emotions to feel at a very young age. And I really felt like, or I feel like from that moment, my childhood, my innocence felt like it was cut off. And what we don't realize is with grief, it isn't just when someone, moves on to that next life. You grieve every loss. Grief can be as simple as when you have an expectation to go to a yoga class, but you can't go to it because you had to work late. Even in that really simple situation, you can feel the emotion of grief because you have lost that vision of going to the class. So back to it, of course, my entire family entered this very deep state of grief, and they all had their own ways of coping with the trauma. And it's not my place to talk about their experiences, but all I know is that humans in general do the best that they can with the tools that they have. And with this knowingness, we can be compassionate and never enter a state of blame because you never know what someone is going through. And I learned a lot about compassion. I learned a lot about gratitude for life through this whole experience. And something else that I got, which was a blessing and a curse at the time, was becoming hyper aware of everyone else's emotions. I observed and witnessed how this tragic event impacted everyone around me. And I had this urge to help people, to help them feel better, which really, I believe, attributes to what I do today. But for me, I spent the rest of my life being that agony aunt and wanting to help people, having this desire to help. But because I had shut down my own emotional processing from such a young age, I spent the next 18 years really bottling up my feelings, not giving them enough space, not honoring them, and not listening to them, and really just suppressing whatever was there. And now I look back, it's very immediately apparent because I actually spent the next few years after 9 physically vomiting. I spent many nights in hospital. I had endless tests, and doctors were actually convinced that I had an eating disorder, but I didn't fit into any of the boxes because it wasn't something that was physically self-induced. And I had a lot of time off of school, and my poor mum had to homeschool me. But what I do remember is I learned the Roman numerals off the back of it. So I can thank my mum for that and for, all of her support during that time. But now, with my new knowledge, I know exactly what was happening there. I was suppressing my emotions so hard, and my body was telling me, you're not okay. And I needed to feel. But of course, back then, we just didn't have the information that we have now to connect the dots between emotions and physical symptoms. So, moving on to my teenage years, I spent a lot of time searching for who I was, as we all do, right, when we're teenagers. I was very physically unhealthy at this time. My body was screaming. I had constant UTIs, constant migraines. I experimented with drugs. I had a very strong sense of feeling alone, but I didn't know this was what I was feeling because I had numbed. I had numbed all of my emotions. And now I look back and with a lot of my healing work, I had these feelings of abandonment, even though I was never actually abandoned. And it's really important to note here that how we feel on the inside may be completely different to what people see on the outside. And, a good example is, you see all of these childhood superstars that seem to quote unquote have it all because they've got a lot of money. But that doesn't equal to genuine joy. That doesn't equal to genuine happiness because maybe they're great on making money and that's what people see on the outside. But if they do not have the skills to navigate their emotions, to feel, to navigate their internal world, then, it's likely that they're avoiding it. Anyway, I digress a little bit. So back to the story. I started failing my exams, and I was very lucky that my intuition led me very clearly to see that I wanted to, quote unquote, make something of myself. And I had a very strong desire to do something to come out again, quote unquote, stronger than the shame of where I was. And I was really somehow very lucky enough to get an apprenticeship at a bank, and I came into a very stable relationship. And I'm still really grateful for all of those things because it meant that I learned structure. It meant that I learned discipline from this very messy space that I felt within. And I could learn to pull myself back and to call out for support when things got really tough. At the same time, even though I had this discipline and this structure and this very masculine energy, I still wasn't dealing with my emotions. And I believe that I spent 18 years coping by being busy, by being so independent and spending all of my energy coping with these feelings and masking them up. And I never saw this at the time, but I was very much drinking and abusing alcohol. And this was a very big problem because I was spending so much of my time hungover. And again, I've said it before and I'll keep saying it, but my body was still screaming. And I was again in hospital with kidney infections. I've now got cysts on my kidneys as a result of that. I was working 14-hour days, excessively over exercising because I looked like I had figured it all out. And I was chasing for feeling something. So I felt like I was drawn to very extreme things. And I spent a lot of time in confusion. I spent a lot of time worrying why I was so unhappy, why I was staying up at night, and why I felt like I was living my life like a character in a game in player mode. I had it figured out, or it looked like I did, but on the inside, I was just so unhappy and none of it made sense. So I pulled up my big girl pants. I went to a therapist, and for 10 hours, I spoke once a week, every week, talking about a different topic, about a different family member, a different situation. And yes, I would totally feel lighter coming out of that office. And yes, it helped me understand and it gave me greater awareness as to what happened in my childhood. And I will always be grateful for that first step. And I always think it's an amazing first step for anyone who is starting their healing journey. But what I didn't know was what to do with this information. And at the time, I almost became so ingrained in my story of being a victim of my story because I couldn't change the past, right? None of us can change the past. And I became so attached to this story that I felt like a victim and I didn't feel empowered. But all I knew was that I never wanted to have to tell this story all over again, because although it was super beneficial for me, it wasn't a process that I felt like I needed to repeat. I needed actionable tools. I needed a solution. And like I say, I do not disagree with talk therapy. And I think there are so many times where a licensed professional is needed. And there are occasions where clients may come to me wanting to work with me, and I would totally send them in that direction. At the same time, I have also spoken to hundreds of people who, at this point, they have really experienced something similar where they have spoken, they have used talking, and they have a really good understanding, but they still feel stuck in this emotional loop of the ups and downs and are feeling disconnected. And my program is really all about feeling your feelings and using the tools to move past them, using tools to detach from them in the moment of trigger. So for me at this point in my journey, walking out of that office, like I say, I wasn't sure what to do next. But I was very clear on the fact that I wasn't happy. So I kept drinking, I kept working, and one year I went on holiday with my mum to Mexico for her 60th birthday. And we had never really gone away together in our adult life. And on the first few days, she had a really bad accident and it was pretty horrendous. So she had to spend the rest of the holiday in bed. And at this point, my unhealthy coping mechanisms of suppressing my emotions were so strong. I was so overworked, and essentially I just binged for 7 days drinking, and I felt so disconnected from everyone around me. I didn't know who I was, or quite frankly, where I was most of the time. And at one point during this holiday, I remember looking out to sea at 2 a.m., sitting on the beach by myself and thinking, I just want to go in there and never come back. But I also knew in my logical brain that I had so much to be grateful for. And it was just what I call an inner battle between my head and between my heart, because they couldn't communicate anymore. And I just remember towards the end of that holiday having my head down a toilet and witnessing this thought that I had by the sea and knowing that something needed to change. So when I came back from that holiday, my relationship ended and I felt equally as lost. And I started to not enjoy my job as much. And I could see that this inner conflict was starting to really crumble everything that I knew as true. And I just didn't have the answer. So I carried on. I worked harder. I sunk more into that masculine achieving energy. And I met my incredible fiance, who I'm with now, Mark. And I was doing really well in my corporate job. You know, I achieved a vice president status, which at the time I was working towards for 8 years, and something still felt really off. And I was in this blame. I was in this blaming my past, blaming my circumstances, and I did not stand within my empowerment to make a change. And again, you know, this isn't my story to tell, so I won't go into detail, but during this time, I supported my partner through a lot of his own inner conflicts, which being a witness to was extremely triggering for me, as my biggest fear was losing someone that I love. And it really got close to it a few times. And quite frankly, this man that I am with right now, he could write a very interesting book about everything that he has gone through. So maybe we'll get him on the podcast sometime. But as a woman, especially, you know, we can be so empathetic and we can feel like we can carry everything and feel the shame, you know, if we feel like a failure. So we can continue to live in this denial that we can help everyone. And we keep trying, but what happens here is, you know, we don't always help ourselves first. And it's a bit like it's a bit like on a plane, where they say to put on your own life jacket first before putting on your child. The same goes for our emotions. We need to put our emotional needs first before we can truly be there for other people. So, where this all came to a head, where the climax happened, was one day I felt so much pressure. I felt so overwhelmed and I felt so disassociated. And I was trying to support everybody but myself, working extremely hard. Nothing was wrong in my head, but I knew in my heart that something wasn't right. And we were in between living premises at the time because we were always moving house, upgrading, improving, achieving. And I went from this achieving buzzy mind to finding myself on the bathroom floor, paralyzed. I wasn't able to breathe. I was sweating and all of my muscles were tensing up. And I can picture it now. I can really picture all of that fear that I had been suppressing coming up to a head within that moment. I felt a complete loss of control. I was completely unable to communicate. And for those of you who have experienced this, you may have gathered that I was having a very severe panic attack. And this panic attack was so frightening because it was nothing like I'd ever experienced ever before, being so numb to suddenly being so frightened. I thought I had control, but in reality, my body can go into this state whenever it wanted. And I think it comes at no surprise that this was shortly after a time where myself and Mark were not communicating and we were on extremely thin ice ourselves. And although there is nothing funny about a panic attack, right? I've been there and they are absolutely petrifying, but I can almost sort of laugh now looking back at it. And my partner didn't quite know what to do when I had that panic attack, and he was carrying my completely frozen body into a bed, and he put on spa music and he was fanning me. And to be fair, it actually did work. And I was half trying to laugh during this panic attack and half within a paralysis. But I feel like this was the reality check that I needed. And we've all maybe been at our rock bottom at some point, and that was mine. And I see this now, or I saw it as my second opportunity. My first opportunity was where I was at the sea in Mexico and I had those thoughts, but this was now my second opportunity to do something, to take responsibility for my feelings and stop blaming my past, stop blaming being too busy, stop blaming having to pay off my mortgage, and realize that I create my reality. We all create our reality. And it just really felt like a huge awakening to understand that everything that I was stuffing down, all of these heavy emotions were still there. These were causing the stress. These were causing the panic attacks, the migraine, the vertigo, the UTIs, the issues in my relationship. And I realized that my body is that thing that is going to be carrying me for the rest of my days. And I'm spending all of this energy coping and being busy, but where was that going to get me? I didn't even know who I was anymore. And it felt like all of these light bulbs or fireworks just suddenly went off in my head during this panic attack. And there's this idea within trauma healing that in order to complete the cycle of trauma or any negative emotions, to not stay bogged down in their heaviness, but to allow ourselves to feel them, allow ourselves to feel them, to heal them. But have I have not known this before, I would have got support to feel. I would have learned how to move through my emotions. I would have learned to raise my vibrations and run towards this amazing, incredible life that I have now, because I feel lighter. I feel way more inner peace. I feel embodied and aware. And instead of needing to run away from this pain in a direction that just was not serving me, and did not serve the future generation, did not serve the new people that will be in my life in the future. And being in this place of subconscious survival is something that we pass down to our kids. So I knew that it was my responsibility to break this cycle. And what I did was I dived head on into the fear. I quit my job. I stopped drinking alcohol. I stopped smoking. I sold my house. And I was on a mission to strip everything back. And at the same time, my partner was told that if he kept working, then he would be in a wheelchair because of physical injuries. So there was really this mix, this big climax of where everything needed to change. And for me, all I knew is I had to reveal what had been hidden. I went through this entire identity crisis. That is what followed when I shed everything back. I realized that I didn't know who I was without this label of being a party girl, without this label of being a hard worker. And, I did consider myself a little bit of a corporate hippie, and I had to go through this entire process of grief of the old me and tap into that corporate hippie that I knew that was there. I had to let go of any shame that I would disappoint others in the changes I was making to my life. I had to let go of the guilt for leaving things behind, of the fear that this new version of me would cause issues in my relationships, in my friendships. Would these relationships and friendships sustain this new version of me? I had so much fear of my house sale not going through because, like I say, I literally stripped back everything. There was such a fear of having no income, and perhaps if the sale didn't go through, then how would I pay off this huge mortgage? And did I really need to change my entire life to find this magical place of inner peace? Again, I wish I knew at the time, and I wouldn't change my journey for anything because it has taught me so much. But the answer is no. I wouldn't have changed everything. If we cannot find inner peace in our current situation and are constantly desiring for new jobs, for big changings, for new beginnings, for new relationships, then we're just going to find the next thing, and it's likely that we're not going to be happy. And what I wish I knew in that situation is that we have this innate superpower to move through how we are feeling to find joy. Joy is not about what's on the outside, but it is really about our ability to let go of what is not serving us. And when we can let go of what isn't serving us, it really frees up space to find joy in the mundane tasks. And of course, quick caveat again, if anybody is in an unsafe situation, then of course make changes. What I wished I knew for my situation specifically was that I could tap into my discernment and my healthy judgment to make a very clear judgment to understand if my situation was safe. And it was. Within my situation, it was my emotions that was clouding my vision. And it made me feel like every situation wasn't right. And, where I moved on from that when I did these huge changes was some pretty crazy things. I did plant medicine in the Peruvian mountains. I did ecstatic dance and drank cacao in Ecuador whilst I flung my arms around in the river. And I really did try to learn everything I could about healing. But again, what I learned was healing isn't about the intensity of the healing practice. It's not about who we are, or it's not about where we are. There is no magic script and there's no magic retreat that can fix us. And we can't, or what I learned is I couldn't go and heal on an island, right? Because what happened was I felt healed on this island when I was going through these intense healing experiences. But when I came back to my reality, I wasn't equipped to handle the challenges of life. And on top of that, I was going to yoga, I was meditating, I was doing all of the things, and it just still felt like what was at my core, what was driving me, wasn't healing. And I didn't want to have to wait until yoga to feel better. I wanted to feel better in those moments where Mark told me that I wasn't doing enough washing up, and then that triggered my sense of self-worth. I wanted to feel better when I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. I wanted to feel better when I had to have difficult conversations with my family and not be in fear of having triggers. So I came to a space of a bit more clarity of knowing what I wanted, but still no idea how to get there. And shortly after, what I call the algorithm gods came my way. I came across a couple of incredible teachers, so shout out to Laura and James, and I got on a call with them with no idea what I was signing up to. I didn't know what I was going to learn, apart from the fact that I was training to help others. And within my teacher training, I received every single answer I was looking for. How to heal the past without talking about the past, how to learn how to let go in the moment of trigger in an instant, how to move through everything that was driving me to my overworking, to my guilt, to my shame, teaching me how to feel. And I really learned how to alchemize the energy of those feelings that I was spending coping, how to redirect that precious energy within the moment of triggers. And it was only then that I learned that I didn't need to keep chasing. I didn't need to keep looking for this joy and chasing this inner peace, because it was already there. I could let go of these heavier energies that were keeping me down. And from there, all of my health issues cleared up. I used to take pills daily, and now nothing. My relationships have flourished, and I really do abundantly attract opportunities. And my thoughts, I know how to navigate them. I am the observer instead of getting pulled into their stories. And I know who my authentic self is. Along the way, I've also found my tribe. I've met some incredible people. And, I feel like the number one thing that drives our entire life is our inner state. And I really learned that investing a little bit of my human experience, even though at the time this money was very scary, investing that time and investing that energy really did give me the tools for life to feel that inner peace. So from there, I decided to do this professionally. I transitioned into launching Emotional Health School, to teaching people these skills which we were never taught in school. A lot of people may see this work as alternative or woo-woo, but it's really not. It's really just our innate human abilities to return to the ways that we were born, to return to our birthright. So now I hold, very highly personalized, supported one-to-one sessions, and I will soon be launching a group program where I teach people how to unlearn emotional patterns that are taking up their life force energy. I've helped people out of depression, I've helped people out of anxiety, or I've helped people to just simply move towards a more authentic self, how to raise their vibration to live a life that is more conscious and more aware. And this doesn't mean not feeling. Letting go doesn't mean not feeling. It means creating the capacity to feel and to move through it. And, it's really funny when I was thinking into what to call this podcast, and I landed on the conscious approach to stress and anxiety relief. At the time, I had the word relief on the end. I looked up the acronym at what it meant, and the acronym was CASAD. And what it means is to marry in Portuguese. And this made me know that this was just the perfect name because to marry symbolizes a commitment. And the two things that my clients really need are a willingness to take the first step, but secondly, a commitment to themselves. You need to commit to you to start feeling better. And the commitment is for a very short period of time, like I say, in my human experience, but there is so much freedom in that commitment. So much freedom to take that one step to pave the way to a lighter life for the rest of your life. And, I want to acknowledge that sometimes all of this healing and these words that I'm using, like vibrations and healing journey, that can be a bit scary. And let's be honest, we're talking about anxiety here. Um, Something that I always like to ask this emotion is, what is scarier? Staying where we are, staying coping, or being on a supported, proven journey and having your hand held every step of the way. Because so many of us carry this belief that we need to do things alone, but there is so much empowerment in being guided. That is how we are wired to be supported and to be helped and to learn these skills for life, or not even learn them, remember them. So it's not just during our time together, but I will always be your biggest cheerleader if you are my client. And what's really interesting is within my program, there's no cookie cutter one way approach to stress and anxiety. And that's why we learn how to work and how to navigate all of our emotions. Because there's some people like myself who are anxious because I was grieving. There are other people out there who are anxious because they've suppressed trauma. There are other people out there who are anxious because they live in a constant fear of judgment or because they haven't achieved the feeling that they feel like they're meant to at this point in life. That can also cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. So I really help people understand what is alive for them and we take it from there. And I'm so happy for, the skills and the tools to take clients from depression and panic attacks to smiling and laughing in the kitchen and dancing around because that is what we're here for. That is what life is all about. And I truly feel like this is my dharma and it connects me to my most authentic joy is really helping people find peace in their everyday activities. That is what I'm here for, not chasing these big shiny objects that we feel like are going to magically fix us, because if we keep doing that, then we're just going to keep being in this cycle of unfulfillment and unsatisfaction, if that's even a word. But I just love my job. I'm so grateful that I get to do this. And when you come into my program, hopefully you can see by my story that I do bring a lot of experience to the table. And I love sharing this with my clients every day. And if you were inspired by this story, please message me on Instagram at Emotional Health School, message the words podcast story. Like I said earlier, there's nothing that makes me happier than knowing that this story may have helped you in some way. And if you're interested in my healing program, I will see your message and I will get back to you and let's talk, because the chances are that this program can change your life. Anyway, my loves, that wraps up this episode of my story. I hope in some way, shape, or form there was at least one thing that you could take away from this. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for you being here. Even if you don't feel like you're on a healing path or you don't know it, you are on your life path and you are an empowered, wonderful, beautiful human being, even though it doesn't always feel like it. And that is exactly what I'm here to remind you. So I'll look forward to us being together for the rest of the series, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Sending love.